Okay, so this tutorial is going to demonstrate how to make a first-person dungeon. So let's get right into it. Down here in the asset area, you'll see there are two images. These were drawn in external paint programs and then just dragged and dropped in. If you want to have an object have an appearance to it, so say you want a floor to look like boards, one way to do it is you can just create an image, a PNG of boards, and then you just apply that in a form that's known as a material. And that's what we're going to do. The reason why I say that is because if you have destructible environments, the floor actually may be individual models. Each board might be its own model. We're not doing that. We're just going to use a material to make it look like it's separate boards. So let's go to Game Object, 3D Object, Cube. Now the first thing I want to point out is that the cube is square. The texture for it, is rectangular. So we'll address that in a minute. The second thing that I want to point out is since we're going to tile this image over and over again, it's important that the left lines up with the right. So you don't want too much of a space here. If the brick terminates here, then the brick needs to terminate on this side. Likewise, if the brick is cut off on this side, the brick needs to be cut off on this side. So this and this laid next to each other will look like a full brick. Also, I like to use an alternating pattern. So if you notice the split is here, the split is here. Likewise, since the split isn't here, we can tile this vertically as well and maintain that pattern. So, first things first, we said that this is rectangular and this is square, so we need to make this a rectangle. So let's make this a scale of, say, 2. Now, we also need its depth to be 2 as well. Because even though this may be a different axis going from forwards to back versus side to side, ultimately the length of this is determined by the same ratio, and I'll explain that in a second. So now we have our rectangular object rather than a square. You can just drag and drop the image right onto it. A folder called Materials is created. If you go in there, there's the wall texture. So this, as I said, is a material. If you notice, it says .mat. Okay. So let's move this so it's closer to the camera and easier to see. Actually, let's zoom it towards the camera. And a little bit more just so it's easier to see without running it. Okay, so you can see that kind of looks like a cinder block. It's slightly wider than it's tall. And so now we know what our ratio is. So if we go to our cube and we expand the texture that's applied to it, you can see the scale is 2, all right, but the tiling for X is only 1. Likewise, the Z is scaled 2 and the X is 1. The Y is 1 and the Y is 1. So for the horizontal, you've got a 2-to-1 ratio. For the vertical, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So every time you scale this object, you need to keep that ratio. So say I want this to be 6 by 6 by 2 because it's too short. To maintain that 2-to-1 ratio, this would need to be a 3. And to maintain this 1-to-1 ratio, this would need to be 2. And again, if we click on the camera, actually we made it bigger so it went past it. You can see that it's still that same slightly elongated cinder block appearance. And now you have a wall. It's not quite seamless because in the middle here, between the two vertical tiles, you can see the line is a little bit too dark, but you get the idea that it really needs to match up. Okay, so that's what it looks like if we run it. So now what you're going to do is now that you've got a building block, you're going to turn this into a prefab. Actually, let's make one more change. Let's make this a y of 3, just to make sure it's tall enough. And that means the y has to be 3 as well. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take this cube. Let's just rename it wall. And you're just going to drag and drop it into here. That turns into what's known as a prefab. And that is, I can now drag and drop this into any scene. We haven't really gotten to scenes yet, but games are broken up into scenes. And so this would be accessible to any scene. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I don't have to go into the scene, recreate a wall, do all the stuff with the textures again. I can just drag and drop this object. So let's take this and we'll slide it over. Now, I want to mention unity units. For blocks, 1 unit of scale is equal to 1 unit of position. So this is set at, let's make this an even -4. Okay. So this is -4 position, which means the positions this occupies, it's 3 to the left and 3 to the right of that position. So its x scale is 6. Get the math because it's -4 plus and minus 3. So 3 in one direction would be -7. 3 in the other direction would be -1. -1 to -7 is 6. So it's important to realize that the scale does indeed match up to the position, that it's using that same numbering system. So let's now, knowing that, so we know that this extends from -4 in one direction, it's going to -1. Okay, the camera is 0, so that means there is a 1 unit difference from the center of the camera to the edge of this wall. So using that math, we can take this wall, copy and paste it, or if you wanted to, you could drag the prefab. And by using the same math, we can figure out how far it should be over on this side. So again, it's using 6, and if we want it to be 1 over from 0, so 0 plus 1 is 1. So 1 plus 3, half of this amount is 4. So if we're at 4, the camera should now be dead center. This edge is +1. This edge is -1. And there you go. It is centered. So my explanation might not have been that great. My apologies. But like I said, it's pretty much just math. You're taking the scale and you're splitting it to find out the range of positions that this is occupying. So let's just do one more thing and then wrap up this video. So we'll do a floor now. So game object, 3D object, cube, and this one's going to be enormous. This one is going to be like 40 by 40. Do 0, 0 for X and Z. Push this down along Y. Now again, using that math that I was just going through, you could do a similar thing. You could look at the size of this versus its position to know where the base matches the floor. But like I said, I don't want to get too deep into the math. I just wanted you to be aware of that ratio. See, is it a -2? Yes, looks like -2 even does it. Now, similar process. We're going to take the floor, drag and drop it. Clearly, those boards are too big. So we go into the new floor material. This one we don't have to be as precise about. So first of all, it's a square on a square, whereas the other one was a rectangle on a square, so we had to change it into a rectangle. This is a square on a square, and it's really, really big. So you don't have to get it exactly right, but let's try like, say, 12 by 12. Depends how big you want the boards to be in comparison to the cinder blocks. Oops, sorry, I put those in the wrong one. It is these up here. So there we go. That's about it really for this introductory one. Now we need a roof still, and that's not much of a maze, but now you've got the basic components. So yeah, we might as well just create the roof, and that would be a good place to stop. So the roof is just going to be the floor. Now, presuming that you're going to start at the outer limit of the area, you might not want the floor to extend that far back, so you might want to modify this so you're not having all that wasted space. Now, let's call this floor, and then we're going to need a ceiling, roof, whatever you want to call it. And we're just going to take this and I'm going to drag it up. And again, you can do the math to get the exact positioning of this. And there you go. So now you notice that suddenly gets darker. That is because, I haven't mentioned it, but there is this directional light here. And now the roof is in the way of the light, and so it's blocking the light. And so now it looks more like a dungeon. There are other things that can be done too. There's still ambient light coming in from all other directions, not the top or the bottom, but from the four sides. So as we put more into place, more light will get blocked out. And to keep the roof, the ceiling, from blocking our view, what you can do is you could just come over here with the roof highlighted, uncheck Mesh Renderer, and what you've done is you've disabled the Mesh Renderer. You haven't deleted it, you've just disabled it. So when you run the application, you're going to want to make sure you check this, but when you're designing and developing and moving things around, you can just uncheck that. That way it's not blocking your view. Okay, so that should do it for this first one.